Hello, heroes and Zargons. I'm Alfred, and this is the Trials and Tribulations of Zargon, a series which details the many ways in which the Emperor's heroes foil Zargon and his minions in their plots to conquer the Empire. In it, we'll review published quests and any house rules or modifications I'm using to make the game more interesting and challenging. My heroes this campaign are played by a single, experienced player, so they cooperate, share resources, and are wise to the wiles of Zargon. The tuning I've done to these quests reflects that. In this episode, we'll cover Quest 5, Melar's Maze. We completed this quest out of order, though only because the pages stuck together when I flipped through the quest book. The quest begins with Mentor telling the heroes, long ago, a powerful wizard by the name of Melar created a talisman of lore which would enhance the wearer's understanding of magic. It is rumored that Melar hid the talisman in an underground laboratory at the heart of his maze, fearing it might be stolen by the evil minions of Zargon. As you search for the talisman, beware of many traps and deadly monsters. My hero player did not take this last line to heart, and I took great joy in watching his heroes bumble into nearly every trap in this dungeon. More on that, and on traps in general, in a moment. If the lair of the Orc Warlord presents a linear dungeon, Melar's Maze is anything but. The heroes begin in the northwest quadrant, and while there is one exit from the stair room, the path branches pretty quickly, offering heroes two options for navigating the northwest quadrant, and a third option for bypassing that quadrant altogether. Heroes can turn south and enter Melar's throne room, accessing the alchemist's bench room through the secret door, or turn north, where they see a mummy in the eastern wing of the north hallway. Chasing that mummy will run the heroes straight into a falling rock trap. Failing to chase the mummy leaves the heroes with yet another monster to deal with later in the dungeon. Heading south sends the heroes through a room that contains only a pit trap into the alchemist's chamber. From there, the heroes again have three options. They can go left into the 2x6 room in the southwest corridor, right into a room with a gargoyle, or even further to the right into a trapped hallway. The first option, the 2x6 room, is the most direct path to Melar's library and the Talisman of Lore, which resides in the central room. The central path, the one that leads the heroes to explore the southwest quadrant, leads to a stone gargoyle in a room full of traps and treasure. The third path leads to a trapped torture chamber and an alternate route to the library. The layout of this dungeon is fantastic, and it is one of my favorite to play through. The heroes have options, and they can guess at the direction of the treasure, so choices they make are meaningful, and the dangers they face produce rewards. In D&D, dungeons that inflict arbitrary or capricious punishments on heroes are often called funhouse dungeons, and this dungeon does have a little bit of that effect. Heroes cannot search for traps while monsters remain on the board, so without a crossbow, many of the traps become unavoidable. The great pleasure, for me though, was that on this particular playthrough, my hero player stumbled into a number of avoidable traps as well. Out of the gate, my hero discovered the secret door into the laboratory, allowing him to bypass the traps in the northern corridor and the northwest quadrant. Wanting to be thorough, however, he checked the hallway to the north. We were by this time playing with my monster timer house rule, so he rushed the mummy to shut down the threat of attracting additional wandering monsters and triggered the falling rock trap. Once that path had been blocked off, the heroes were haunted by a zombie every 4 turns as they turned south, promptly walking into the pit trap in the pit trap room. The heroes continued to trip every trap in the dungeon, some because monsters kept them from searching, and others due to unforced errors. In the end, the traps and the wandering monsters caused enough collateral damage to force the wizard to succumb, the second death in our campaign. Unfortunately, another hero was in the room to keep the monsters from spiriting away his gear. Moreover, this quest was punishing enough to keep the heroes searching every room for traps for the foreseeable future. Traps everywhere are great, but only once in a long while. Traps in the base game suffer from 2 problems, depending on their placement. If they're in rooms with no monsters, they rarely have any effect other than slowing down gameplay. Heroes easily find them and then wait around for the dwarf to disarm them. If they're in rooms with monsters or are in front of doors, traps quickly feel unfair and punishing. They encourage boring and repetitive strategy like blocking the door and waiting for monsters to attack the heroes. There are numerous ways to tackle these problems, and the first is to put some kind of time pressure on the heroes. That can be done by punishing slow movement through a dungeon or rewarding quick movement through a dungeon. If heroes are constantly under time pressure, they have to make the decision about whether to search for traps, and then, once traps are discovered, whether to disarm or to avoid them. They also have more incentive to move into a room and deal with monsters. My house rules don't create constant time pressure, but do encourage aggressive play in some situations. The wandering monster counter and ability of monsters to move through doors encourages heroes to try to deal with monsters in one turn or to block their escape. I use this mechanic to particularly good effect in the torture chamber, trying to bait the heroes into the pit trap with the zombie that begins the game outside the door. My heroes were savvy and lucky, however, and moved in an unpredictable pattern to attack the zombie. So I guess they didn't get hit by every trap in the dungeon. I have other mechanics that I use to create constant time pressure, most of them negative, and all of them appearing in future videos. But something I'd like to start experimenting with is more positive time pressure. The easiest way to create this would be to create additional rewards for speedy completion of a quest. This could be things like treasure, easier fights, additional companions, or in a campaign like ours that includes homemade quests, access to new quests. The other way to solve the traps are boring and frustrating problem is to abandon the ones that can be solved with a roll and replace them with puzzle-like traps. I once had a dungeon with a door that disgorged a zombie every turn and then snapped shut. The way to keep zombies from respawning was to wedge the door open so that the spawn effect could no longer fire. Heroes did this by leaving behind a piece of equipment, jamming the door open. This kind of solution has its own drawbacks. First, it depends on having hero players with an ingenuity and interest in puzzle solving. Second, even for those players, it can slow a game to a crawl, so traps of this type need to be a lot less frequent. Third, they can be quite punishing. If you never shut that zombie spawner off, you're going to have a zombie every turn. So, they need to be carefully tuned to your game, or perhaps bypassable in some way. Maybe they bar the way to a special item or an easier path, but don't keep heroes from seeing a quest through to completion. Finally, and I think this is the most minor point, they negate the dwarf's only unique ability. One way to combat this last problem is to use the disarm mechanic like a skill check in D&D, giving the dwarf a clue about how to disarm the trap on a success. I'm sure there are more ways to make traps interesting or effective, and I'd love to hear them in the comments below, but for now I'd like to comment on a final aspect of the dungeon, its treasure. The Talisman of Lore is, in the base game and all subsequent expansions, among the worst artifacts available. There simply aren't enough uses for mine points in the game system as written. This is a problem I, and likely every other homebrewer, tackles in their homebrews. Moreover, this is the first artifact that heroes find, and they have thus far seen nothing that interacts with mine points, making it a pretty disappointing find for those heroes. I don't have a great solution for this, other than substituting a different artifact. It is appropriate to slowly introduce the use of mine points to new heroes, but it also makes sense to let them boost mine points after they've seen the value mine points have in the game. All in all, both on account of its layout and on account of what it does in terms of introducing threats to heroes, I really appreciate this quest design. If you're liking this series and finding my thoughts valuable, please send an orc, zombie, or chaos warrior to smash the like and subscribe buttons. Then, if you have additional ideas on how to mangle heroes with traps, let's plot together in the comments below.